Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Thursday, September 28th. Coming to you with another AMC stock update this week. So I'm doing a lot of these this week because day to day, it's kind of interesting. We've had a lot of, I wouldn't say fake outs, but we've had a lot of head fakes, and we definitely have had a lot of our setup kind of show one thing and then sort of, gets to this point where you've got this very narrow window and then it chooses the other thing, right? So like this is pretty normal for AMC. It likes to play the final stages of any kind of accumulation or distribution really close to the wire. Very normal for us. I'm going to be going over just the basic stuff today because this is what we've been talking about all week. These are the kind of things that I think are good to watch, and it can get complicated. It can get kind of noisy with the interpretation of stuff. I did a more in-depth analysis last video, so if you missed that and you want to check it out, that's talking a little bit more about the rotation and the comparisons between these two areas that are on the screen right now. The point is that my outlook for this week was based on not just a sequencing, but really a bottoming setup. And we need to kind of distinguish between the two things. So there's a good way to go about doing fractal analysis that I think we all can kind of participate in. And fractals, if you don't know what that means, a fractal is a repeating pattern, and it's a pattern that typically repeats indefinitely within itself. They appear in the market probably because of computerized trading. They are very widely known and widely accepted. It's not some kind of a fringe thing to say you're doing a fractal comparison. If you go to Investopedia, that word is used all over the place, and it has the proper definitions for it. And we talk about things like iterations, meaning that there's a repetition of something within itself. It's not like copy-paste. It's really that within its own structure, it has that repetition. So a lot of people, when they're looking at fractal comparisons, they're kind of just doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't think that's completely wrong. I do the same thing sometimes. But we got to remember, like, the definition of a fractal is just this pattern that repeats within itself, right? And you can see how the patterning here, when you shrink it down, repeats again here. And then even more so, if you shrink it down again, it repeats again indefinitely. And these are things that when we talk about like this, right? We talk about fractal analysis. This is always what I'm thinking about. In terms of repetition and how this is playing out. I'm not usually thinking about how it's going to compare exactly one-to-one with something else. The reason that I use what I call like the master sequence is because it's like a perfect example of like a repeating iterative fractal. And it just so happens that the master sequence that I use is a bottoming sequence. And it also just so happens that that bottoming sequence tells us a lot of other things about sine wave analysis and whatnot. And, I don't expect everybody to sort of agree that this is the master sequence, you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of people don't think that this is, like, adequate. I find it to be sufficient, though. And mostly because I can see how, again, when we look at the patterning, it's just a really clear example to me of how the stock likes to navigate. And I don't think it's that controversial or anything to call it like a master sequence. When you're looking at something like this and you're saying, well, I think this is repeating indefinitely, and it obviously is, you can kind of see how you can draw that conclusion. And at the end of the day, what I'm saying is repeating, and this is where we get to this kind of conversation about what is a fractal and whatnot. What I'm saying is repeating is a pattern that it repeats within itself indefinitely until it gets to the end. But it's also just a way of understanding sine wave analysis. Sine wave analysis is also nothing new. Sine waves are mathematical concepts. They've been around as long as, they've been around. I mean, math is thousands and thousands of years old. The idea of we're pushing up and we're pressing against resistance, and then we're jumping that resistance in what I call a bridge, and then we're coming back down to check that resistance, right? And anytime you're looking at a sequence in a setup, whether it's a sideways action like a pennant or a flag, or if it's like trend analysis, it doesn't really matter. You're going to have sine waves. Like, that's the nature of the market. So when I do stuff like this, and I'm doing that comparison, I'm doing it from that perspective. And so for me, it's not just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's, all right, well, what did this do? What was the point of this particular sine wave? Because if you're not careful, what you could end up doing is you could end up presenting a situation that's not really happening. Because it might be that, yeah, this looks really similar to this initial walk up, but in my opinion, and what I think is reality here, is that it isn't that walk up. It is that this is actually the top. And you might be like, well, why? It's not higher. This one made a second high that's higher, and it looks like a head and shoulder. Why wouldn't it be this whole first area? Because it's not about what it looks like visually. In the end, it's about what it is representing, right? And in this case, it's representing like a press against the secondary creek that was passed. So this is like the first one and the second one, and this is the whole first one and the second one. And it is a different shape, you know? But ultimately, like, look at RSI, for example. You know what I mean? And this is where I'm kind of going to sort of go back to where we are and stop talking about just what is a fractal. But the idea is, like, what is it accomplishing, right? Are you jumping over the local downtrend? Are you jumping over the big downtrend? Are you crossing a center point? Why does that pattern, why does that move, price action move, even exist? So I think a proper understanding of fractals has to be married with basic stuff, really basic stuff, and it has to be married with sine wave analysis. I don't feel like you can do fractal analysis without understanding sine wave analysis. Don't think it's possible to ever be very accurate. Otherwise, you're always going to be like, well, where am I? Where am I? Where am I? And so for about a week, I was saying to everybody that I thought that we were not going to run, and I was feeling kind of bearish because after we didn't make the immediate retracement back up to 10 something, that was kind of the first thing. I was like, well, that's that. You know, if we're not going to do that, we're probably going to range out, right? So I started looking at the range and trading the range. And I even said in the Discord, and by the way, shout out to our Discord. We've had some really awesome contributions lately. Guys like Misfit Trader, guys like Riley. I'm missing like people, Dink even. I know that there's been several people, Zephoax, Scrutiniza, lots of people that have been doing some really awesome analysis lately. And a lot of my stuff lately in the Discord has been me talking about my trades, but I was talking a lot about like where do I think the price is going to go next and why do I think it's going to do that. And a lot of what I'm hearing, and this is why I'm even talking about the fractal stuff, not trying to be argumentative, just saying, a lot of what I'm hearing is like, hey, so-and-so from this stream says this, and I think they're right, and so it's going to go up. And I always am like, well, okay, and I get it, but I also think that this was forming out more like a pennant. This one doesn't quite look like that at first. Looks more like a head and shoulder, right? But it's forming out more like a pennant, and it also had signs that we hadn't quite gotten this last drop yet. And you can see how very clearly these are kind of panning out to be really, really similar in terms of the bottoms. And that's the reason that, like, why I've been kind of more or less not ready to jump the gun and say, yeah, we're about to run. I said that there's a possibility the LPS happens. It just didn't seem as likely. So for me, it's kind of like, what's less likely, what's more likely? More likely was still down, and that's what I've been talking about a lot. And there's a rotational symmetry and all that jazz. So now I'm looking at this, and you might say, well, what do you think is going to happen now? Just give me the down low. Well, we're basically about to be finished. You can see that the whole point of this S-curve with this really nice, in the end, RSI divergence, which we have the same kind of divergence here. The whole point of this was to kind of gear you up for a turnaround. It's a little accumulation on the bottom. There's nothing wrong with what we've seen so far, but what needs to happen now is now we need to come and make that lower RSI hit, and we did. We got lower than the previous RSI bottom. We need to make that lower RSI hit, and then we need to reverse and come back above. And this is going to give us the best opportunity to launch. And honestly, at this point, I could care less if it doesn't come super low. If it only comes down to the 740s, fine. Great. You know what I mean? I don't really care. The main thing is we need to see it push back above this downtrend right here that's coming down and then press out to the top. But in the scheme of things, I really was looking for like a lower price point, like a lower low, like a spring, basically. Because I think if you can make the spring right here and then the RSI doesn't come down as far, you've got a really strong divergence, just like we had on this bottom, where you have a slightly lower low, but that RSI is really curled up. And this is a 2-hour time frame. I just picked a 2-hour because I felt like it illustrated the best. And the others were a little more hard to kind of pinpoint where that line needed to be. But this is something that I'm not like convinced that it has to be this way. It's more of, it makes a lot of sense to me, right? We were getting these iterations kind of to the upside. It seemed like it was shrinking, moving kind of up and sideways. It did seem like we left quite a bit of trading on the table down below. There were two specific spots, you know, that I was looking at where you have like a liquidity gap beneath like what would be considered the floor. We've been trading mostly around the center. So it makes sense to me that any kind of a spring or LPS action, probably if it didn't happen like, again, yesterday, was going to be down low. So that's the way I've been trading it. I'm waiting to see if this gets a little bit more oversold. I think it could come down farther than I've drawn it here, but I really think it could get down to near that 35 mark. I need you guys to kind of bear with me because it's very, very similar, okay? The way this is being walked across what we would consider to be a creek and then how it's coming down. And this guy, even the RSI levels at this point are so eerily similar that it would not surprise me if it was nearly the same, okay? It's coming to almost the exact same place. So I need to see this kind of walk back up. It could happen very quickly. You can see that the in and the out here on this particular one, the angle matters. So like this came down at 53 degrees, and then when it left, you can see that, yeah, it's roughly 53 degrees from the bottom right back. Actually, not even roughly. It's like almost exactly 53 degrees right from the bottom to where that breakout was. Well, maybe there's some good news there, right? Because we've got a really steep downtrend right now, and it's coasting almost at the same angle as the entire channel line, which, by the way, this is the same thing. It's like walking down the channel line right here. So really similar setups, but this one obviously is going to be a little bit faster, probably because of how quickly it came down, assuming that it hits bottom this week and then has a quick turnaround. I don't know where the bottom is exactly, right? If it's at 745, then yeah, I think Monday could be takeoff day, you know? If the bottom's way down here, there's no telling. You know, this could take till Friday. We could see a big hook, and then we could drop again. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of different ways it could get down here. Could it drop instantaneously? Maybe on bad news or something. But, you know, that's just what I'm trying to say is, like, you take it and you look at the angle of in, angle out, and then you say, okay, well, where does that happen to move? And I think most of this indicates that you would probably, even if you came down to that sub-7 level, probably leave, and you got to cross that 840 marker, really. That's the big one for me. So I would take whatever it is that you think the bottom's going to be, draw out the opposite on that trajectory out, and then see where that intersects 840. It could be about a week. Okay, this is Wednesday next week. I know you guys are like, well, what if it ends up dropping really fast? Would that make it steeper? Yeah, I think potentially. But right now it's following the channel line pretty well. Okay, so I just think the RSI needs to cool off a little bit more. Then we need to see that rebound. We need to come all the way back up to about 840. Once we get to that point, that'll take a few days probably, you know, longer is usually right. And then we can recover. Now, some of you are keen, might remember that there were a lot of lower targets too, and one of them was like that 535. This was really dependent on that extended hours action on the rotation, and without the extended hours, this doesn't make as much sense. Like, it doesn't seem like it would be needed. It'd be more likely to see something like this. And even if people have these really low price targets, it doesn't mean that you're going to get there right now. I should be one to talk, right? Like, I remember these kind of areas thinking it was going to do that drop to 350 at a time. And it just like never got there, right? It would get like really close and then turn around. So I don't think necessarily that, hey, Citigroup has a target of 445. That means it's got to hit tomorrow. Well, maybe. I mean, it could hit in a massive drop off, but you're going to have some kind of a probable catalyst for that news, I think. And if it doesn't have a catalyst and it happens, it happens. I guess my point is right now, I'm not seeing that as likely. We've got a pretty huge divergence on the 2 hour. I think if it finds its bottom here and can manage to come back up, that's all that needs to happen. That's where I'm going to lock in a good trade. Okay. So watching for that drop beneath the new low or some kind of a turnaround around 745. If it turns at 745, just be mindful that we might get a big hook up to about $7.85 or $8. That would not be the time when I would buy in personally. I might buy in on the hook just to trade it, but I wouldn't play beyond that until I'm seeing it come all the way up. Even if it comes all the way up, you got to be mindful that a UT is possible, and a UT is an upthrust. And as soon as it gets back above 849, I think an upthrust is absolutely possible. So you got to be careful. If you come up to like the 880s or something like that, and then it starts sliding back down pretty quickly and dropping lows, and specifically you're going to watch this downtrend right here on the top of the pennant. If it loses that trend after pumping up, I would not be confident. I would say don't trade it, but I can't give you financial advice. But that's the sign of a UT. All right. That's not what you're going to see with some strength here. You should see it come up and hold above this pocket and then push up again. Okay. And if it pushes up high and then slides right back down beneath that top of that pennant, that's a sign of an upthrust. And at that point, you're looking at it coming all the way down probably and making a new low, because that means that this was now going to be a distribution. Okay. And therefore you're going to come down and re-range. I think, reasonably speaking, again, if it follows what it's been following thus far in terms of like the bottom patterning and how that navigates the liquid, the RSI, things like that, we're looking more like next week. Okay, so thus far, that's what I'm thinking. All right. In terms of price targets to the upside, look, I don't have like a ton of them. I think that the very first one, if it got down to $7.99, there's a pretty clear target to me. That's this first gap up at 14. I'm not super confident that we're just going to like take off and go. I think it's going to be one of those things where we walk up, and if we then find support in this area, we might get that next push up, and then you're just kind of going to level to level. The 50% retrace at that point is right around $20, and could we get a lot higher? Could it go beyond that and then come back down? Yeah, when we say 20, we're talking about this range, right? And like it possibly forming a range here. And you can see how that would happen if, for example, it hit like the top at 28, right? That could be like the support that hits and it turns into resistance and yada, yada, yada. And you can see how that kind of creates a nice equal portion. And those are things that like we got to keep in mind. Like it could extend beyond that on a big run. In the event that this breaks down after a UT, I would be a lot less bullish. Okay, so if it did come up and create a UT here, an upthrust, and then slide back down, I wouldn't necessarily assume anything. Like I would not assume it's going to break out and then go back up. I would watch this channel line and see what happens when it reacts. And again, now you have to go back through like pretty much your liquid center at $8 before confirming again upside. But as long as this either forms a spring or an LPS and then breaks out with an SOS, you're good, man. I think it's going to fly. And I think that's a pretty big run. Even if you buy in when, you know, smart money would buy in mostly, would be right here. This is a big run. This is 122%. So I'm pretty excited about it. Personally, and then the market just opened. Personally, I've been trading quite a bit. And this has kind of been my trading plan thus far. I'm not really looking at any kind of big long-term stuff right now until we see that patterning form out. I think a lot of those calls are going to get kind of chewed up right before it takes off just to kind of drive the price down. So I'm sort of just sitting on it and waiting, trying to be really patient. But I have traded a lot this week. These are my trades this week. So I've got a 30%, 60%, 75% gain, a 30% gain, a 30% gain. I scratched on this one. That means 0. And then I had a loss here. I held too long. It pumped up to about, I don't know, 15%, but I wanted 30%. So I didn't get it. So unfortunately, it just didn't come high enough. And obviously, this was a breakdown. I flipped back to bear side and actually got a 50% gain on the bear side. And then did it again yesterday for 33%. So I've been doing really well. This is a very tradable stock, and mainly what I've been doing is trading options that expire the same week and just in and out in the same day. Most of these are about 1 to 2 hour trades. They're not very long, and I'm trading on pivots and breakdowns. So like once it pivots and then it breaks down, that's pretty much where I'm trading. Each of these, like the pivot and then the support, pivot, breakdown. You know, this case I was a little late, but I got half the move, pivot, breakdown. And then I'm watching as those sine waves go, right, how those crosses are interacting. So we're looking at stuff like this. Like this to me is a great confirmation when it jumps over a creek, and then I wait for it to find a bottom. And then once you see it make a support, make a new high, make support, that's a good buy-in, okay? And I'm obviously watching things on like 15-minute and down. So it looks like we're getting that drop this morning. This is good for us. We want to go ahead and get down low. There might be a mild gap here. I can't really tell. It looks like it. But anyways, I digress. I'm not going to make this video super long. So I hope you guys are playing what you want to play here, being patient, waiting, and I would just be saying again, watch that RSI on the 2 hour, watch the see where the bottom is, whether it's the 745 area, and we already kind of passed that, so dipped right through it. I think we made a new low too, so it'd be interesting to see what happens right now. 15 minutes looking a bit overcooked to the downside. We might see a little hook action this morning. Could be a good little swing, and then we may, again, we'll see what happens. We may see it come right back. So we'll find out as the day goes, and I'll try to do one more update tomorrow. But I hope you guys have a good one, and I will talk to you later.